Exercise 3. Now we're going to analyze the hotel bookings that we completed earlier in exercise 2. So one of the questions we normally would want to know is how many bookings did we receive for each room type? And how many room nights of each room type did we sell? We also may want to know what share of total bookings was contributed by each room type and what share of room nights was contributed by each room type. So for this calculation, we're going to use a function called COUNTIF because for total bookings, we just need to count how many bookings we got for standard twin room. And the way COUNTIF works is we're just going to count how many times each room type appeared in this range, which is C5 to C95. So this is the range that we want to count. So each time we see executive queen room appear in this range, then we know that we had one booking for that room type. Okay, so we are going to use a function called COUNTIF for this. So again, let's remember this range, C5 to C95. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so equal. So COUNTIF starts with a C, and we can just choose it from the list here, COUNTIF, double click. Okay, so the first argument is the range that we want to count, and we could actually type the reference to C5 colon C95 on EX2 hotel data by hand, but I'm just going to use my mouse to click over to the other worksheet, and as I click, you will see that it automatically enters the sheet reference for me. But you just have to remember that you're in another worksheet now because you got to go back to your formula later on. So I'm just going to select the range, and you can see that as I am selecting, it's also being entered right here. Now I'm done entering the first argument, so I type comma to separate it from the second argument, which is the criteria that we're going to apply to this range. So only when the criteria is true do we count the cell that is in this range. So the criteria, so for the criteria, we go back to our original location. So we move back here. So our criteria is going to be standard twin room. So we only want to add to the count if we see standard twin room because we're entering it for this cell. So one choice we have is to just type standard twin room here directly, and we must put double quotes around it, right? So you can see the answer is 24. But the problem with this formula is it is not in a form that I can easily copy to the other rows, because if I copied it to the other rows, then I'll have to change standard twin room to deluxe queen room, deluxe twin room, executive queen room, and so on. So to make it more flexible, instead of typing or hard coding the value for the criteria here, I'm going to use a cell reference. Okay, so I'm going to use A5, and this would have the same effect. It would still count how many cells in C5 all the way to C95 of this worksheet contains this value, except later on I can copy this to the other cells without having to retype the criteria. And before I copy, I also have to make sure that C5 and C95 are absolute references. All right, so I think that looks good. This is now in a format that I can copy, and so I'm just going to drag this all the way down. Okay, and you will see that when I copy it to the second row, C5 colon C95 remains fixed because of the absolute referencing, but A5 has adjusted and become A6, which is what we want. And so the criteria automatically adjusts according to the row number. And now we can quickly add a sum here. Okay, so we have a total of 91 bookings. For the percent of bookings, we simply take the bookings from each room type and divide it by the total bookings to find out the share of bookings. And before we can copy this over, we have to make B11 an absolute reference, or since we're not copying to another column, we can actually make it a mixed reference. We just need the row number to stay as 11. Okay, so $11 will work too. So now I'm going to press enter. So the answer is 26.4%. Now, if it's not showing up with a percentage sign for you, that's because you're probably still in the general format. So to make it appear with a percentage, you can just quickly click this shortcut button. And to add decimals, you can click the increase decimal button. Okay, so we're just going to show it up to 1 decimal place. And now we can drag it all the way down, right? Now for room nights, we want to add this column. Okay, we want to add this column, but only if the room type is the one we're interested in analyzing. So for this calculation, we need a function called SUMIF. Basically, we want to sum this column, room nights, but only if the corresponding cell in this column is equal to the room type we're interested in. So let's see how that works. Equal. So SUMIF starts with letter S. So you type S and you will see the drop-down list. And you can actually just scroll down and double-click SUMIF. And of course, you can type it manually if you wanted. So the first criteria is the range that you want to evaluate or apply the criteria to. And we already know from COUNTIF earlier that the range is going to be the room type, because we only want to add the room nights for a particular room type. So this is our criteria range. Okay, so comma, go back to the original worksheet. Okay, now it adds the sheet reference as you click along. So we just want to backspace here. We don't need the sheet reference. So our criteria is going to be, once again, the room type, comma, and then the range that we want to sum. The range that we want to sum is room nights. Okay, so we select that. And again, as you select it, it's being filled in up here. You have to manually type the closing parenthesis yourself, and then you press enter to go back to the original location, and you'll see that the answer is 188. So there were 188 room nights for standard twin room. And here's the formula. Now, before we copy, we need to pay attention to wherever we need to make a reference, absolute or relative or mixed. So we need these two ranges to remain fixed. And for the criteria, we do want it to adjust. So we're not going to make this a absolute reference. And we can remove the sheet reference because we're in the same sheet. So we don't really need the sheet reference there. Okay, so that looks good. So I'm now going to copy it. And I'm going to quickly calculate the sum. And for the percent of room nights, I'm going to change this to general so you can see how it looks without the format. So room nights divided by total room nights. And again, for D11, we need to convert this into, it can be absolute or it can be mixed like this. Okay, so now we're going to scroll down, copy, and change it to percent and increase the decimal place. So that is the first part of exercise 3. We've calculated our total bookings and our room nights. Now, if you notice, there's a green triangle on the upper left-hand corner here that seems to think we've entered an erroneous formula, but actually this is correct. So if you want to get rid of all these green triangles, because it's just trying to be helpful, it's telling you that you have an inconsistent formula, but this is correct. So we're just going to remove this, ignore the error. Okay, so that gets rid of that triangle there.